This is the Shiftheads podcast with Shane Hewitt and friends.
Welcome to the Shiftheads podcast. I'm Shane Hewitt. Blaine Kyllo is back again. Blaine, solocore.com if you want to find him for all of the links. Go to shiftheads.ca. For our links, like and subscribe to the channel. That would be awesome. How are you?
I'm well. You know, it might be the beginning of a new year, but that doesn't mean that games aren't being released.
Well, that's the thing, hey, like pre-Christmas, always big selling time, but you're not really buying games and putting them in a box anymore that you can do it the same way. Maybe that's one of the things that benefits gaming, because then they can sell games all year and they don't have to hinge themselves on one commercial season. But at the same time, they lose that commercial season impact and excitement.
Yeah, I think that it's like anything else. There are slower times of the year, but there are still movies being released. There's still TV being made. There's still books being published. And you just will come up with a schedule that makes sense to you and to the slate of things that you've got to come out into the market. Ubisoft's got quite a bit of stuff that they're bringing out this year. And so I think it makes sense for them to bring out Prince of Persia, The Lost Crown, which is their reboot of the action platformer series, starring the Prince of Persia.
So let's go into the history. We'll tell you what, let's get a set of tone here. Let's get a little segment so everyone can get a bit of a tone of the game, and then we'll come back. And I want to know the history of this in particular.
Sargon, the citadel, pride of the Persian Empire, is no more. I heard about the wretched, inconceivable that lurks in the shadows. Souls are lost in the sacred archives, forever prisoners of time. No one knows what became of the Hyrcanian forest. The Chidra and vile creatures fester beneath the canopy. Brave the raging sea and the chaos in its waves. We must break the curse that plagues our kingdom. But there are creatures, gods, banished for their sins. They could doom us all. Even in the darkest hour, do not lose hope.
Prince of Persia, The Lost Crown, the World trailer is what that one is. Okay, this is a reboot, Blaine.
It is. The original game actually came out in 1989. It was developed by Jordan Mechner, whose first game was Karetica, which has been talked about a lot recently, because what Jordan did with these games was essentially create genres that persist today. And in his original Prince of Persia, he did something quite different. He wanted to have this action game. So it's a side-scrolling thing where you actually battle and jump and platform as you're moving side to side. But as opposed to traditional animation, what Mechner did is he actually captured video of his brother doing the movements and then used rotoscoping, the animation technique called rotoscoping, to create the animation. And so you had these incredibly fluid movements in the characters that weren't possible by sort of pixel animation that had been used before. And so he actually created a genre. It's called the cinematic platformer genre. And it's this notion where you've got smooth moving characters that are running and jumping and battling creatures and environments as you play through the game.
Well, I found it very reminiscent of Zelda. And I know that that's maybe a bit of a stretch, but if you think back in time to when Prince of Persia and Zelda came out originally, and the new versions of Zelda today, that the sort of jumping and I don't know, the animated shield looking jumping, off a rock or whatever, like those things looked very similar to me.
Yeah, there's all kinds of reinvention that's going on, and also honoring the past by going back. And that's actually what Ubisoft has done with this Prince of Persia reboot, because in 2003, when Ubisoft made a reboot of the series, they actually moved away from the side-scrolling platformer, and they went to a more of an action adventure game. So more of um a Tomb Raider type of a game where you were moving through the environment and having battles. And it wasn't a side scroller at all. It was quite different. It was a third person adventure game, but they had similar elements. So in the Sands of Time from 2003, you had the ability to rewind time, and that was one of the things that you used to solve puzzles and explore the environment. In The Warrior Within in 2004, they had portals so that you would go to different time periods, and that was formative and critical to how you solve the game and solve the puzzles to be able to proceed through that game. And what's happened now with The Lost Crown is it's kind of a return to the original roots of the franchise. This is a side-scrolling adventure, so it's not third person at all, but it's got a completely new and radical art style, really nice animation here, and all kinds of game mechanics that weren't even thought of back in '89 when Mechner first created the game, but have been created in other games since. So, in interesting ways, Lost Crown is both honoring the past and doing things completely different.
Worth it?
I think it is. It's quite an interesting and exciting game. So it's also very rooted in Persian culture, and the developers from one of Ubisoft's studios in France, they actually come from the Persian culture themselves, which is something that isn't always true from games. And so this is much more. It feels much more genuine. It feels like it's less a European or a Westerner who's taking a bunch of highlights from things and mashing them together. And I actually feel like it's coming from the Persian culture itself. There are 7 immortals, elite warriors, that have been tasked to protect the kingdom of Persia. And the prince has been kidnapped. And so the 7 immortals are sent to rescue him. And you play as Sargon, the youngest of the immortals, and you're blessed with this dexterous movement and the ability to wield 2 blades. And the whole story takes place at the ancient city at Mount Kaf, which is a historical place in Persia. And it's also the home of Simurgh, the god of time and knowledge. And so that sets you up for really interesting story about betrayal and friendship, and also opportunities to play around with some of these time mechanics. How and that's how you'll proceed and progress through the game, is by exploring how time works and using some of the powers that you'll accrue as Sargon. You'll accrue these powers that will enable you to proceed and to have control over time and space.
The side scrolling come in handy for the older gamers that maybe haven't been connected for a while.
Even though it's a side scroller, it's not like the side scrollers of 1989.
It's not
It's
8-bit
very
Mario.
smooth. No, it's very smooth, and really it's a design choice. It's a decision that the developers made because that's what was going to give them the experience that they wanted to bring to gamers. And so it's not, when we say side scroller these days, we don't say it in terms of it being a limitation. We say it just in terms of a design choice.
Yeah, sort of a refreshing look at things that are happening style. Okay, now you said France and programming out of France, and you would think that, I mean, if you're making a movie and you want to have a real aviation experience, typically you would hire or bring in a staff that has history around aviation. So that kind of makes sense. Canada, on the other hand, with a diverse culture, has become a real hotbed for gaming and game design. programming all of it. And there's more going on in Vancouver that you wanted to share.
Yeah, a new studio announced just at the end of last year called Worlds Untold. This is a studio set up by Mac Walters, and people who pay attention to game development will recognize his name because he was pretty important in BioWare's Mass Effect series. Mac is now relocated from Edmonton to Vancouver, and he's leading Worlds Untold. This is being financed by NetEase Games, which is a Chinese developer and publisher. This is their second studio. They've got one set up in Montreal that's working on a massively multiplayer game. And right now, we don't know what Mac and his team are working on. They're only saying that it's a near future action adventure game in, quote, a breathtaking world filled with mystery and exploration, which doesn't sound a whole lot different from how you might think of Mass Effect. The first three games in that series that Mac was a part of were really groundbreaking games. So I suspect that Mac is bringing some of his experience and knowledge from the development of those games to what he's doing with Worlds Untold.
It's very cool stuff. Canada's been at it a long time. If you go to solocore.com, Blaine promises he's got a link up there for Half-Life. Half-Life 25-year anniversary on this and an update to celebrate, if I've got that right.
Yep. 1998, this game was first released for Windows. Gordon Freeman, the protagonist of this first-person shooter about aliens coming through portals that were created when we got a little too hubristic with our physics experiments. The Half-Life anniversary.
That's going to hit home for a lot of people these days, especially after the last 4 years. My God.
The anniversary, the game itself has been updated, so there's some new multiplayer maps. The graphics settings on the game have been updated. It's got support for game controllers now, and more importantly, it's got support for Valve's Steam Deck. Now, Half-Life was the first game that Valve ever developed when it was released in '98. So Valve would go on to create the gaming platform Steam, the HTC Vive, which was one of the first VR gaming headsets, and the Steam Deck, which is this handheld gaming computer that you can now play the original Half-Life on. It's a really great 1 hour documentary about the creation, essentially the creation of Valve, but really the development of Half-Life back in the 90s. That has been developed and published by Valve, and it's on YouTube, and it'll be on my website as well. Really fascinating look, bringing together all of the people who were involved in that original development.
There's a couple of benchmarks in the history of games like Half-Life. I mean, you go back to, around 1998 when Windows 95 had been around, and 98 came out and all these different platforms to use computers. But then you had the diskettes back in the late 80s, early 90s that, you had to know your run commands, but you could run them on your computer. And then you go back to the more 8-bit stuff that was the original Nintendos and Colecos and all those different ones. These different benchmark moments, there seems to be this time, this era around 2000 where, I don't want to diminish it changing, because it really changed at each benchmark, but where they started to go, this is going to be different. And that's when maybe the horsepower kicked in. I don't know. The graphics definitely changed. I think of Halo. There's got to be a point when they created Halo where somebody went, this could be like the Pong of graphics and adventure, right? So what do you think? Where's that land with you? Because it seems to be that Half-Life in particular and this other games of this vintage really have survived differently.
And there's a reason that they get updated like this, and it's because people are still playing these games even though they are 25 years old. And that goes less to the ability of the hardware or anything like that. And it really goes back to the inherent design of the game and the degree to which it is creating an experience and a feel that players want to have and they want to be in. And I think that that's what everybody continues to strive for, is to create that environment and that feel. I think that these days Fortnite is giving that to kids. It is the place. It doesn't have the best graphics in the world. It's got interesting graphics. It doesn't necessarily have the best frame rates or anything like that, because it really depends on what system you're running it on, but it provides a space that people want to be in, and it's an enjoyable experience. It scratches that itch, and that has nothing to do with technological prowess.
Yeah, there's a little bit of nostalgia. There's a little bit of romance, a little bit of nerd, and a little bit of community. And voila, you have this, hey?
Community is it.
Community is
where
it.
people want to play.
Yeah. Solocore.com. You want to connect with Blaine, do that. Go to shiftheads.ca and you can connect with our community too, shanehewitt.ca to connect with me. Do us a favor, subscribe to the channel. That's a big one. And that will help us. We appreciate it. And leave your comments down below. Great to see you, Blaine. Thank you.
Thanks, Shane.